Welcome to all. Today's webinar from Solventure will be on increasing product profitability, and we'll be discussing how we can drive a decision-making process that is based upon facts, that is objective in nature. So starting from data, we'll discuss the role data plays in this field of corporate performance improvement. What is our agenda for today? Well, we'll start with a quick summary on what are some of the key challenges B2B manufacturing companies are facing at this moment when it comes to managing their profitabilities, and what are a number of the factors that are at play there. Secondly, we'll discuss about what is the role of finance in this activity. It's a cross-functional responsibility to drive the profitability of the organization, but what exactly is that role of finance in this matter, so that we know who is in the lead and what are expectations from the different departments. And then actually the core of today's topics will be about, okay, how do we organize a decision-making process to drive that profitability optimization in a sustainable, recurring manner in line with our ambitions, with our targets. And there in that third block, we really want to give you a methodology, let's say, on how this can be approached within B2B manufacturing companies. The fourth element of today's agenda will be a case study. We'll discuss a food and beverage case and really tangible results that were delivered upon profitability improvement with one of our customers. And we'll end with a number of key takeaways. We'll discuss around 5 key takeaways. Typically, it are also elements that are a number of struggles within real-life cases that are important to take away when you would approach this topic within your context. So let's dive right in. I see we have plenty of people on the call in the meantime, so we're ready to get into the core of today. So when it's about the challenge for B2B manufacturing companies, actually, we look at a number of external driving factors that are at play. And I actually have listed 3 of them. One is high inflation. We have had many years with very low to no inflation that was taking place. And the last 4 or 5 years have now brought us into a new era where inflation is really material, and that also all the companies are being faced with putting their process, their methodology on managing prices, managing profitability, to put that on the test, let's say. So that high inflation means we'll need to make sure that we are well organized to deal with translating that inflation towards our customers, to actually maintain profitability levels. A second factor at play is that for a lot of raw material prices, especially in food and beverage and FMCG companies, a lot of the raw material prices are very volatile in nature. And I've selected a couple of them at the right-hand side. For example, butter price has increased sharply, so sharp increases and decreases over time. Also, coffee is one of the factors at play very recently, with coffee harvest that has been impacted significantly. So that was much lower than anticipated, meaning translating immediately to a high, sharp increase in that coffee price. And the same applies for cocoa, where also harvest of cocoa is much lower than expected. And therefore, there is a sharp increase in cocoa, especially for these food and beverage companies. That has a significant impact on the cost of products, so on the increase of cost of goods sold. Sunflower oil is another one, And it's not only limited to raw materials that are contributing, let's say, to the food cost. It's also other components of the product cost, for example, paper and paperboard, which feed into packaging, cost of packaging. You see there a sharp increase in also those costs. And these sharp increases, of course, you have contracts. Procurement agrees upon contracts, and there is a certain certainty for an upcoming period of 12 months in a lot of cases. But at a certain moment, the increase will also affect your organization, and then you need to have processes in place to anticipate and translate these increased costs into a selling price, into your portfolio of which products you're selling to which customers and dealing with that. A third factor is also the consumer price pressure. So that's also an effect of the, for example, the inflation. Depending on the different countries, the inflation is not necessarily linked to an increase in income of the consumer. So therefore, the consumer also has potentially a lower buying power and therefore also gets much more price sensitive than before. So these different factors, which are well known for a lot of the companies we work with, that those factors actually drive the necessity and importance of, okay, how do we deal with this within our organization, but in a structured manner, not in a one-off ad hoc approach, not where we do one project once. No, this is something ongoing and continuous. So how do we put in place a process, a methodology to manage that within our respective organizations, and both from a commercial performance perspective, but also operational performance. It's not only about how we translate this to selling prices with the sales organization and the marketing teams, but it's also what can we do in optimizations in our operations setup to actually produce at lower cost or find structural savings in that area as well. So that's the challenge at hand. So how do we manage that profitability in a structured way? Second topic on the agenda is, okay, what is the role of finance in that profitability optimization? And then we actually zoom out on the finance function and see how that finance function has evolved over the last, I would say, decades. And at the left-hand side, you see the as-is situation or the past situation for the finance function with the different activities and what has been historically, let's say, their time consumption within the finance organization. And that goes from transaction processing, reporting on how things have worked out or what has been the result of past months, then going to control to do deeper analysis on, for example, actual production costs or a deeper analysis on what has been sold. And then actually there was less time and less resources available within the finance function to actually take on an activity which is rather decision support. So a lot was linked to transaction processing, reporting, and control. Now, when we look to the evolution over the past 2 decades, what have a number of improvements been? A lot of organizations have now very integrated systems, have value-add services, processes have been redesigned and been automated so that actually the time invested and the amount of resources and the time they spent on these activities for transaction processing, reporting, and control has been able to be structurally been reduced so that more time is available for actually decision support. And when it's about decision support, what is actually the type of focus for the finance function? It's thinking along 2 strategic paths. One is do the right things. Are we in the right activities. And the second element is doing the things right. So within the activities, within the categories that we are working, that we're active, are we efficient and focused? So actually what we see for finance, that there is an evolution from let's say more administration and finance reporting towards much more decision support. And these days it's much more being taking up a role from within finance as a business partner, and a business partner that facilitates decision making. A different way of looking at the same evolution is this overview. Similarly, finance and administration at the left-hand side, very historically, I speak about around 20 to 25 years ago, accounting and reporting primarily, then an evolution towards accounting, reporting, and controlling. And actually the evolution for the past decade, and that varies industry by industry, is accounting, reporting, controlling, and then a piece of advisory. That a piece of advisory often is also denominated with the terminology of FP&A, or financial planning and analysis. And that FP&A domain falls into two parts. One is what I would refer to as analysis and optimization, which is really what we will cover today about decision support. Are we doing the right things? And what we are doing, are we doing it correctly? Or are there efficiency gains to be made? And the second part is more financial planning, which is translating operational plans within the organization to a financial plan, and based upon that financial plan, making up a budget and making decisions in line with that budget. So that's the evolution for finance, really finance as a business partner. And when companies or when finance organizations achieve in that, they can also really bring a certain mindset within the organization. And one of our contacts is Jörg Hanneman from Julius Meinl. And from talking to him, I got the following quote and the following statement, which I remember vividly. It's the role of finance to install an economic conscious decision-making within the organization. And that exactly summarizes well what we will cover today. How can we actually facilitate a decision-making process and do it in a way that is economically viable and correct? And that for me is what the role finance should take on in this decision-making process. Now, when we want to get to a structured, recurring approach for profitability optimization, what could be a methodology that we can apply in that domain? Let's take a look at that. And we'll start with a metaphor, and the metaphor is a gardener that is working in its garden. He's weeding all the unwanted plants out of his garden in between his preferred vegetables. He's selecting the weeds and he's adding some fertilizer. Now, what is this metaphor about? And what is the link between this and the profitability optimization opportunity for companies? Well, actually, I would break it down into these following steps. Actually, he keeps the overview of the full garden. He determines what the gardener wants to grow. He is selective. He says, like, okay, I want to grow these vegetables. He's deliberate on what he wants to grow. And then he determines what is not fit, what does not fit into this garden. That's those weeds, and he would actually remove those. Why would he remove those? Well, actually, they create opportunity for the vegetables to grow and to flourish. So actually, he removes in order to allow other things in the garden to grow and to have focus on that growth. And at the last, he would add fertilizer to accelerate the right growth. And well, the same applies for B2B manufacturing companies. When we look at the total portfolio, we need to have the total picture of what is the full portfolio of all the products that we are producing. We need to understand from our strategic plan, what do we exactly want to grow? Where do we want to excel? What is our long-term mission or vision, and the strategic plan that we have established that should be there. Based upon certain rules, which we will get to, we should identify those products or those customers that do not fit the rules, that are not sustainable to be kept in our garden or in our portfolio. And for those things that are not sustainable in our portfolio, we should ask ourselves, will we remediate or will we eliminate what is not fit to those rules? And afterwards, we will ensure that we create focus on those things to grow, to also achieve revenue growth opportunities and targets. So that's the metaphor in order to introduce more a structured methodology. We'll get into a bit more tangible approach. Before getting into the methodology on how to drive the profitability optimization, it's important to think about what are the inputs and what are necessary inputs before starting that decision-making process. And then I want to actually stress or emphasize what is on the left of this slide, which is from a book from Leo Lindberg, which is also on finance as a business partner. And the left-hand side deals with what is the management process that actually needs to be in place in order to be a good foundation to drive good performance improvement, performance management. And there we have the classic management activities of defining the mission on the long term. Why do we exist? Then breaking it down into what are our values as a company, what do we believe in, getting into vision, what do we want to be, and then having a clear strategic plan. And that strategic plan should be translated into a budget, and should also have should serve into what is the implementation of that strategic plan into an action plan. When we will talk further in the next slides, we will talk actually, we will use the inputs from the left to actually develop what is on the overview at the right. How do we make observations, create an idea, prognosis, decisions, and actually we will see that the inputs are necessary for a good decision-making process, but also from that decision-making process that there are proposals to adjust either the action plan, adjust the strategy, not every year, of course, but every couple of years, there will be inputs from that decision-making process, providing feedback into that strategic domain. So important to understand what is our strategy, what is our strategic plan in order as a necessity before diving into a decision-making process. And a decision-making process for profitability optimization for these B2B manufacturing companies. Our approach is starting from the portfolio. What is the portfolio of products and customers? And actually laying it out as a portfolio planning and a portfolio optimization process. The first three steps are activities that typically would happen on an annual frequency. Those are setting targets, setting rules once a year, and then the second part around portfolio optimization. The cycle that we go through is a cycle that we go through on a monthly or quarterly basis to actually drive progress into the activity of optimizing the profitability. So let's step through it. The first step is around creating the awareness on the portfolio performance. We are driving a cross-departmental process, so we need to create, first of all, an awareness between the different stakeholders within sales, marketing, finance, operations, and supply chain to actually have a good understanding of what is our portfolio and how is it performing. We'll go into a specific example later on for each of those blocks. We have a couple of examples distilled. A second activity from there is actually setting targets per portfolio subset. What are good targets for revenue, or revenue target? What is a good target for the profitability for this portfolio subset? What is a good target for the working capital investment? And that needs to be done per portfolio subset. Yes, we have one budget and we have established one budget for the company overall, but actually it's a challenge and an activity to translate the overall budget from the company level into the individual portfolio subsets. And that's what is referred to as cascading the targets, cascading the company level targets into the individual portfolio subsets. A third activity is, in that step, defining portfolio guidelines. We will get to specific examples later on what is actually these portfolio guidelines, what are a number of possibilities to set very clear, easy to understand business rules that especially sales and marketing teams can utilize into making agreements with customers, for example. What are portfolio guidelines of a minimum volume that is required for an SKU? What is a minimum relative margin for specific portfolio subsets? Those are portfolio guidelines. Those are the rules to determine what is sustainable to be kept in the portfolio. So when we go back to the metaphor of the gardener, the portfolio guidelines are actually the rules to determine what are weeds and what are vegetables in our garden. So making the rules upfront, not when the game is being played. So therefore the rules are part of that portfolio planning on an annual basis, not of the recurring activity on a monthly or quarterly basis in the core of the portfolio optimization process. In step 4, we will measure the performance versus the guidelines. What is the performance of the portfolio versus the established guidelines? Step 5 is about analyzing the gap. Where do we deviate from where we want to be? Step 6 is a root cause analysis. What is needed to actually improve and remediate? That will translate into portfolio actions, which we'll need to ensure that we get into implementation of these portfolio actions. So we need to get organized to ensure that we follow through and we ensure that the portfolio actions are being implemented by the different stakeholders from sales, from marketing, from supply chain to actually make sure that they are in the field, that they're implemented. And number 9 is on tracking progress if you're evolving with the performance of the portfolio in line with where we want to be, in line with the targets. That showing that improvement will give the motivation to the different teams, like we are evolving into the right direction, yes or no. And that's actually the cycle and the loop that we will go through on a monthly basis, and we can involve the executive team on a quarterly basis. We'll go through a number of examples for each of those steps. For example, on the awareness on the portfolio performance, everybody knows the Pareto rule, the margin elephant we also discussed in a previous webinar. We always have a lower amount of SKUs or products in our portfolio that actually are the needle movers. So 20% that actually in this example give us 125% of the contribution margin. And we have the back of the elephant, 50% that add 15% contribution margin more, and then there is a significant tail, a tail that in this example actually reduces the total contribution margin with 40%. And at the right, there is an example of how that can be demonstrated, how that can be shown for the different portfolio subsets. What are portfolio subsets? Typically within companies that operate a mixed strategy, branded and private label, for example, that's already a separation. We should look at the branded products separate from the private label products, or products with a very different value density need to be treated into separate portfolio subsets and need to be reviewed separately. In the example at the bottom right, we see that we have 294 individual products, which deliver us a net sales revenue of $91 million, $27 million of net sales margin, which is at 29.8% relative margin. And then we actually see in the AA segment and the CC segment immediately that those needle movers of 45 products that bring us 64 to 65% of the net sales margin in the AA segment. And in the CC segment, it's 114 individual products, which actually bring us 3.5% of the net sales margin, which is around $950,000. Well, these examples are very repetitive with all the portfolio scans that we do with companies, that those conclusions are always in the same dynamics. Always 40% of the references that give 4, 5, 6% of the absolute net sales margin. So having a good understanding of what is in that CC segment is very important, because that's typically where the cost of complexity hits. And then the next question will be, what do we factor into our standard product cost, and which costs are being allocated to individual products? And are we translating all the costs of complexity to, for example, the products in the CC segment? Or do we have certain costs which are also absorbed into the AA segment? And typically changeover costs is one classic example. Changeover costs, how a lot of finance organizations treat it as part of their budgeting process, is that changeover costs are being allocated to individual products based upon the volume produced. Based upon the volume produced, we will assign all of those costs. What is the effect we get? Is that the AA segment will absorb a significant portion of the changeover costs, whereas it's the CC segment that actually drives the changeover costs. It's there that we are doing a lot of changeovers. It's there that we do short production runs. So the amount of changeover costs that are being triggered by the CC segment is typically much higher than the AA segment. So allocating or refining the cost allocation of changeover costs from the AA segment towards the CC segment is an important factor. That's an important improvement that can be made. And it's by looking at the amount of production orders instead of the production volume, not the amount produced, but the amount of production orders that are being initiated. And when that happens, then you typically see that the net sales margin that is here on the overview of 28.1% in the AA segment and 32.5% in the CC segment, that might have a huge shift, because there is much more cost actually triggered from that CC segment. So making these overviews, discussing these examples across the different departments, what does it do? Well, it creates an awareness within the organization on the cost of complexity and on the performance of the overall portfolio. How small are the needle movers and how big is the tail of the elephant? Once we have created that awareness, it's about moving forward and setting a target. Where do we want to be? In setting targets, I distinguish three steps. One is defining the portfolio subsets. That's, as said, based upon value density, but also based upon the value proposition and strategic positioning, the organizational structure. For example, if you're organized by geographical markets that might be at play, or the customer markets. So actually, these portfolio subsets define how do we look at our total portfolio and where will we set individual targets that we can keep people also accountable for these targets. A second step is benchmarking the performance. A lot of organizations know benchmarking from benchmarking their own performance with peers within the industry and stating, okay, we will take the annual reports that are publicly available and we will compare our own performance in terms of revenue, growth, profitability, working capital efficiency with other peers within the same industry, and we will compare year over year how do we perform, and how can we actually set a target for our entire organization compared to these industry peers. Actually, that benchmarking exercise can be done on a sub-company level as well. On the right, we have depicted, for example, one way of setting that benchmarking on the individual product groups. Here we actually make a dot plot along two dimensions. One dimension is the gross margin, and the other dimension is net property, plant, equipment turns, or can also be a dimension of inventory turns. And actually, when we plot the performance of the different portfolios or portfolio subsets on there, we can actually determine what is the balance between gross margin and our working capital or total capital efficiency. And we can see the distinguish the different positions. The line in yellow is the line of the same balance and the same trade-off between margin and capital efficiency. The line in yellow has the same return on capital employed. So for example, for the product group 3, we have two ways to get to the average or to a target ROCE return. Either we increase the margin, or either we improve the net property, plant, equipment turns or the inventory turns, or it's a combination of both. So when we set targets for the overall company, we might have a ROCE target, return on capital employed target. And actually, then the exercise is to repeat that on the product group level and to actually see, okay, how does that roll up in the overall targets of the organization? And that exercise is really very important to do. If we don't do that exercise well, then we can establish a target for the organization, but then we will be ineffective in actually realizing the improvements in practice, because we can only keep people accountable for targets on which they have immediate impact. So that's where it becomes very important to translate the company level targets to individual portfolio subset targets where we can keep people accountable and drive that accountability. So that's all in this second step of setting targets per portfolio subset. A third step in that annual planning is defining portfolio guidelines. And portfolio guidelines, they act as a clear business rule across different departments: sales, marketing, operations, and supply chain. And there are a number of components of good portfolio guidelines. It's defined over certain key figures. It's on a certain dimension or level of aggregation, and it's over a certain time range. And it's, of course, linked to our improvements that we want to realize and the nature of our production process. What are typical examples? At the bottom, I have listed two. If we want to drive operational efficiency and we want to drive that actually our productivity of our operations, of our plants up, we might want to actually reduce the non-productive time in our factories. We want to reduce the amount of time that we lose by doing changeovers? Well, having clear rules on that might be we set a target of minimum 16 hours of production for each SKU over a period of 12 months. So we actually identify every SKU should attain that minimum threshold. If not, we as an organization across departments, we understand that this SKU has no power to survive in our portfolio. One way or another, it is not going to be sustainable if it remains like that. For a temporary basis, that can be the case, but longer term, we know we will need to drive the discussion. How can we either improve the volume we have on it, or can we combine it with another reference to actually make it more sustainable? A second example might be, okay, what is a minimum relative margin for an SKU over a certain period of time of 6 months, for example. And that, of course, is per portfolio subset, because for different categories, you will play in different markets with different profitability levels. So in a certain portfolio subset, you might say, okay, it's minimum 25%. When it's lower, we understand we need to find solutions or identify what are possible solutions, but that will identify that something is off. And that can, these two examples are on the SKU level, but the same applies on product and product group level to actually drive discussions around, okay, are we remediating an individual leaf of the entire tree, a branch, or cutting the whole tree? When we review a product group, it might be that we review an entire recipe or an entire bill of material actually from our portfolio and state, okay, this category of products is just not attractive enough to keep it sustainably in our organization, and we'll need to do something with it. Either we significantly grow or we need to leave that area. Once we have set these rules, we get into our decision-making process and to the circle where we have step number 4. We actually apply these portfolio guidelines on top of the data. We have all of the historical data on inventories, sales performance, margins, and so forth. And then we actually apply the guidelines as a layover on top of that data. In that print screen I've taken here from our platform, we actually have 4 different portfolio guidelines, and we immediately see how many violations it triggers. So in total, there are 108 guideline violations. For the first rule, there are 27. For the second, it's 58. So we immediately have that understanding, okay, what satisfies our established portfolio guidelines and what not. The step after that is, okay, can we understand where we have those gaps? On which individual products do we have gaps and why? We have an example here of minimum net sales margin of $15,000 for an individual item code over a period of 6 months. Well, why is the first item being flagged as a violation? Because we have achieved a 13,931,000 absolute or net sales margin, and that does not reach that minimum threshold. On the second one, it's more, and the gap is more substantial because there we only have a net sales margin of $3,409. Once we have understood where the gaps are, we will need to ask ourselves the question like, okay, what is potential root causes of this, and what can we do to improve? And step number 6 is about that root cause analysis. And in order to do that root cause analysis, we need to understand, okay, if we identify a specific product, to which customers do we sell this product? What are the volumes we sell? At what price point do we sell? What is the revenue? What is the margin over different periods of time? We can look at the last 6 months, 12 months, the last 2 years, and see the evolution over time to actually determine what is at the root cause. Is it a pricing issue? Is it a cost issue? These type of informations we should be able to derive from that root cause analysis. From that discussion, that's where really the cross-departmental discussion should be. What can we actually do to remediate, and what can we do to improve? It's not immediately about eliminating SKUs, it is also about how can we remediate and improve. So what can we do on the cost side of things? Can we actually produce differently at lower cost to safeguard our profitability? Can we work on the selling price? Can we work in how we collaborate with the customer? For example, do we keep it on stock, or is it rather a make-to-order product? If we produce, how much do we produce? Can we be more efficient in production by producing larger lot sizes? Can we change the bill of material in order to change the total cost of products? All these actions are possible portfolio actions that we will follow up and implement actually. Once we have identified those portfolio actions and decisions, it's about follow up and follow through. We see in this area that a lot of companies actually decide upon 100 things, but only implement 20. So deciding is easy, actually implementing and realizing the benefits, that's where the difficulty resides for organizations. That's also why a structured methodology can help. Don't make it into a one-off ad hoc project. Make it into a recurring process within your organization. When you have a recurring process, then one of the things is to have an overview of what did we agree upon to do? What are all the different portfolio actions we have agreed upon? What is overdue? What is with who? Who is the owner of the different portfolio actions? And actually also, do we have a traceability of where are we in implementing this decision? Do we have that traceability of what we discussed before? Because between deciding and implementation, there are several months that pass. Things like a price increase is not something, a small change. It requires communication between different people to actually get that in place and to actually get an agreement with the customer and be able to execute upon that. So having that traceability helps also when people are not able to decide at that moment. So what we see a lot is that sales is not in a position to take a decision or a conclusion on something, but we make a registration that we have discussed, and we will give it 3 more months to get to improve because the volume will follow. Okay, we will note it down. If in 3 months' time it's not improved, actually here we will see, we will have that traceability on past discussions and past analysis on those products so that we can actually follow up and follow through that things are not being, let's say, avoided or left behind. And step number 9 is tracking progress and actually communicating around that progress. In the title, I indicated like this creates motivation. People, when targets are clear and when they see results of their initiatives, they actually get motivation. They are motivated to even work harder or contribute more to achieve the target or move further into the direction of the target. At the bottom, it's something which is quite easy, but when I work with clients, it's sometimes striking that it's not existing in all of the companies at the portfolio subset level. What is the baseline of past year on profitability? What is our target? Is it our target, in this case, 26%? That means we have a very ambitious target to improve with 4.7%. Well, where are we today? We are today at 24.3%. So actually, we have realized a year-to-date margin improvement of 2.8. So actually, We have already done 2.8%. How can we move further in order to bring us to the 4.7 that we have commonly set as a target? When you can do that for the individual subsets, for the different categories of products, and then for the overall, have the summary for all, for the whole portfolio, it becomes a very powerful communication instrument to also communicate back to the leadership team or the management team. A bit more advanced on that progress tracking is the price volume mix analysis, where you can decompose the comparison between last year with the actual year on how things evolve, for example, on the margin side of things. But it drives us a bit deeper to explain that more in detail, but we'll leave that for another moment in time. So these are all the steps, and we have taken for each of the steps in this overall methodology. We have actually identified some examples on how to approach it. So portfolio planning annually, and then a recurring portfolio optimization decision process. Here, a small plug, and this is also what we do with customers. We actually engage with customers, we advise them, we work together with them. We also do that in a very data-driven way. And that's also the platform that we have built. People that are interested to learn a bit more, we have developed a SaaS platform, Solventure Perform, where we actually work, we facilitate this overall decision-making process. But much more can be available on our website, or feel free to reach out. So what are, for me, a number of key takeaways in driving this profitability optimization within your respective organizations? Well, approach it as a recurring business process. Don't approach this as a one-off ad hoc project. This is not a project. The inflation, the raw material price volatility is there to stay, and it is continuous up and down in the raw material pricing. So you require a business process to actually drive that corporate performance improvement, that corporate performance management. So install a process together with your executive team. Think through what is the role of finance. Finance is much more than making sure there are good cost allocations, good standard product costing. Take a role as a business partner to facilitate an economic conscious decision making within the company. Think cross-departmentally. I see a lot of organizations thinking within their own silo, the silo of sales, the silo of finance, the silo of marketing. No, drive accountability across the different departments to actually collaborate towards that common goal for that portfolio subset. A fourth element is about cascading the budget targets. You have an overall company target, but that needs to be translated to individual portfolio subsets. If that is not done, results will not follow. People will not have sufficiently clear, broken down targets in order to get into specific actions in order to achieve that. Drive accountability and set and drive the accountability. Who is responsible to achieve that? And the last point is, going back to the title of our webinar today, make it data-driven. Make sure that it's objective, and not a subjective, very emotional discussion. Because when you're not doing or starting this exercise from data, you will actually get stuck in emotional discussions which are not factual. And so that's the role of data, to bring objective, fact-based information in order to make decisions in this overall decision-making process. So that is the key takeaways for today's webinar. I would say thank you all, and we'll close here.